A poor backpacker saves a woman trapped in a snowstorm, unaware she's a billionaire heiress. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Imagine this: a rugged backpacker, trekking alone in the wilderness, is caught off guard by a snowstorm that blows in quickly, turning the peaceful mountain path into a white, swirling chaos. With the snow falling relentlessly and the wind howling through the trees, the path ahead becomes nearly impossible to see. His footsteps grow heavier as he struggles against the storm, pulling his jacket tighter around him to shield himself from the freezing cold. The storm is fierce, the visibility almost zero, but the backpacker is determined. He's used to this, used to being alone in the wild, with nothing but the open sky and the sound of the wind to keep him company. But today, something is different. As he pushes forward, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the falling snow, his eyes catch sight of something through the mist, someone. He stops in his tracks, squinting through the blur of snowflakes. There, lying at the edge of the path, is a woman, barely able to stand, her figure hunched over and trembling from the cold. He quickly approaches, his heart racing, unsure of what to expect. The woman is struggling to keep her balance, her coat soaked and the cold seeping through her layers. Her face is pale, her lips blue, and her eyes wide with fear. She seems completely out of place in this storm, vulnerable and lost. Without a second thought, the backpacker drops his pack and moves to her side. "Hey, are you all right?" he calls, his voice loud but still barely audible over the wind. She looks up at him, her eyes locking with his for a split second before she weakly tries to stand, shaking her head. I don't know," she stammers, her voice weak and shaky. "I got lost. I can't make it." The backpacker doesn't hesitate. For a moment. "You're not alone anymore," he says, his voice firm yet calm. He carefully helps her to her feet, wrapping his arm around her to support her weight. She leans into him, clearly too weak to stand on her own, and he instinctively adjusts his position to steady her. The storm is getting worse, and he knows they need to find shelter fast. He looks around, scanning the area for any sign of safety, and spots a small cabin in the distance, barely visible through the snow. "Hold on, we're almost there," he tells her, his voice steady despite the situation. Together, they move toward the cabin, the snow now falling in thick sheets. He is careful, making sure she doesn't stumble, guiding her through the storm step by step. Her breathing is shallow, and her hands clutch his coat, the cold biting at her skin. The wind continues to howl around them, but the thought of getting her to safety keeps him focused. With each step, the cabin grows closer, the promise of warmth and shelter in sight. Finally, they make it to the door, and he gently pushes it open, ushering her inside. The warmth of the cabin is a stark contrast to the cold outside. As the door shuts behind them, he helps her to a chair near the fire, his hand steady but his heart racing. She sits, still trembling from the cold, and he wraps her in a thick blanket, offering her a hot drink to warm her up. For the first time, the backpacker lets out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He looks at the woman, his mind racing with questions: who is she? How did she end up out here alone? But for now, all that matters is that she is safe. As she sips the drink, her body slowly warming up, their eyes meet, and for a moment, neither of them says anything. There's a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken connection, born in the midst of the storm. Little do they know, this is just the beginning of a journey neither of them expected, one that will change their lives forever. As the warmth of the fire settled around them, Lucas could feel the tension in his own body slowly start to release. He sat on the edge of the small wooden chair, staring into the flames, his mind racing. His hand still trembled from the cold, but it was more than that. It was the adrenaline, the weight of what he had just done. He had saved a woman he barely knew, without a second thought. But now that she was safe, the silence between them felt heavy. She was wrapped in the blankets, her eyes closed, her breathing slower, but Lucas could still see the faint shiver running through her. He stood up and grabbed the kettle from the small table near the fire. As he poured hot water into 2 mugs, he couldn't help but glance at her every few seconds. Her face, even though pale, held an undeniable beauty. Her hair, damp from the storm, was now resting in loose waves around her shoulders. She looked so vulnerable now, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her. He handed her a mug of tea, the warmth of it steaming in the cold air. She took it without saying a word, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse but sincere. Lucas nodded, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched, but neither of them seemed to mind. He had no idea who she was or how she ended up out there, but something about the way she looked at him made him want to protect her. "Are you feeling any better?" he asked softly. She nodded slowly, her eyes meeting his for the first time since he'd brought her in. "Yes. Much better, thank you," she replied, her voice still fragile. Lucas sat down across from her, his curiosity getting the better of him. "So, what were you doing out there? It's not safe to be wandering alone in a storm like that." The woman hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. I don't know. I was hiking, trying to get away for a bit. The storm came out of nowhere. I wasn't prepared." She paused, her eyes dropping to her tea. Lucas frowned. It didn't make sense. Anyone who would be hiking alone in such conditions should have been prepared, especially with the weather turning so harsh. There was something more to her story. But he didn't press her further. For now, he was just glad she was alive. "Well, you're safe now. That's all that matters," Lucas said with a small smile. She returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something else, something she wasn't saying. "I owe you my life," she said quietly, looking up at him. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy and genuine. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat, but he forced himself to swallow it down. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would do." She shook her head, her gaze fixed on him with a kind of intensity that caught him off guard. "No," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of something unspoken. "You don't understand. You saved me. And for that, I'll never be able to repay you." Lucas felt a flicker of discomfort at her words, as if the weight of them were too much for him to carry. He wasn't used to being thanked, especially not in such a way. "Don't mention it," he muttered, feeling the awkwardness creep in. The woman didn't seem to notice his discomfort. Instead, she slowly pulled back the blankets and stood up, unsteady for a moment. Lucas was on his feet in an instant, ready to help her, but she waved him off. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice more confident now, though she still looked pale. "I just need to stretch my legs a bit." "Thank you again, really." Lucas watched as she slowly walked toward the window, looking out into the storm, her reflection faint against the glass. He didn't know what had happened to her, or why she had ended up alone in such a dangerous situation. But there was something about her that made him feel like this wasn't just another chance encounter. His thoughts were interrupted when she turned back to him. "You know, I should probably tell you something," she said, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. Lucas raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "I'm not who you think I am," she began, her eyes searching his face, as if looking for any sign of recognition. "I didn't want to mention it before, but I think you should know." Lucas felt a strange sense of tension building in his chest. Something in her tone told him that what she was about to say would change everything. But before he could ask her what she meant, she took a deep breath and spoke the words that stunned him. "I'm a billionaire. My name is Emma. Emma Brooks." Lucas blinked, momentarily speechless. The name didn't register at first, but then it hit him like a wave. He had heard of her. The Brooks family. They were famous. Emma Brooks was the heir to one of the largest tech empires in the world. And here she was, sitting in front of him, looking just as human as anyone else. He couldn't believe it. How had she ended up out here, alone in a snowstorm? Lucas sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. Emma Brooks, the billionaire heiress, the woman he had just rescued from a snowstorm, was not just anyone. She was part of a family that controlled one of the largest tech empires in the world. Lucas had heard of the Brooks family, of course. They were all over the media, known for their wealth, their influence, and their ruthless business dealings. But to have her sitting right here in front of him, looking just like any other woman he had helped before, was something entirely different. He had never expected to be caught up in a world like hers, but here he was. Emma, noticing the shock on his face, looked down at her hands, her fingers still shaking slightly from the cold. She seemed to be waiting for him to say something, to react in some way, but Lucas didn't know how to respond. Everything felt surreal. "I know this must be a lot to take in," Emma said softly, breaking the silence. "But I trust you, and I wanted you to know the truth." Lucas cleared his throat, trying to process everything. I can't believe it," he muttered. "I mean, I never imagined that. I never thought you were." He trailed off, unsure of what to say. He had spent the past few hours treating her like any other person in need, but now it felt like a completely different situation. "I understand," Emma said, her voice calm but tinged with a sadness that Lucas could sense. "I wasn't sure how to tell you, or if I even should, but after everything that happened, I felt like you deserved to know." Lucas nodded slowly, still trying to wrap his head around the reality of the situation. "But why were you out there?" he asked, the question finally bubbling to the surface. You're a billionaire, right? Why were you alone, out in a snowstorm, hiking on a mountain?" Emma's eyes softened as she looked at him, her expression becoming more vulnerable than Lucas had seen before. "I needed to get away," she said quietly. "I've been so caught up in the world my family built, in the business, in the expectations, that I forgot what it felt like to just be. I wanted to escape, to feel normal for a little while. But the storm came out of nowhere, and I didn't plan for it. I didn't know how to handle it." Lucas felt a pang of sympathy for her. Here was this woman, who had everything anyone could ever want, money, power, influence, and yet she was lost in a storm, trying to find something more than her inheritance. "You're not the only one who's been running away," Lucas said, his voice quieter now, as if sharing a secret. Emma looked up at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" she asked. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his thoughts momentarily drifting to his own life. "I'm just a backpacker. I've been on the road for a long time now, trying to figure things out, get away from my own mess. I'm not rich, I don't have a family empire. But sometimes it feels like I'm just running away from something, you know." Emma studied him for a moment, and for the first time since they had met, there was a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "I get it," she said softly. "Maybe we're not so different after all." Lucas gave a small, reluctant smile. Maybe not. The silence between them felt different now, less awkward, more comfortable, as if they had both shared something deeply personal without even meaning to. Emma glanced over at the fire, the flames crackling softly in the background. "I don't know what comes next," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've spent so much of my life following a path that was chosen for me, and now I don't even know what I want anymore." Lucas could hear the vulnerability in her words, and for the first time, he saw her not as the wealthy heiress she was, but as a person, just like him, struggling to find her place in the world. "Maybe you don't have to know what comes next," he said gently. "Maybe all you need to do is take one step at a time, and see where it leads." Emma looked at him, her gaze thoughtful. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, as if weighing his words. Then she smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "You're right," she said softly. "I've been so focused on the future, on what I'm supposed to do, that I forgot to live in the moment." Lucas felt a sense of relief wash over him. He wasn't sure where this strange connection with Emma was leading, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like things were beginning to make sense. Maybe he wasn't just saving her from the storm. Maybe, in some way, she was saving him too. The hours passed quietly as the storm outside slowly subsided. The wind had softened, and the snow was no longer falling in heavy sheets. Inside the cabin, the air felt warmer now, more comfortable, and Lucas and Emma sat in the soft glow of the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. The tension between them had eased, and though neither of them said much, there was an unspoken understanding. Lucas had never expected his life to take such a turn. Just a day ago, he was a simple backpacker, wandering through the mountains, with no real purpose other than to find his next destination. And now, he found himself in the company of a billionaire heiress, someone who could change his life in ways he never imagined. He glanced over at Emma, who was still wrapped in blankets, her eyes gazing into the flames. She looked deep in thought, her expression distant, as if she was weighing something heavy on her mind. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, breaking the silence. Emma turned to him, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, she didn't answer, and Lucas wondered if he had pushed too hard. But then, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I'm thinking about everything," she said quietly. "About how different everything feels now, how I don't know what to do anymore. I've spent so much of my life following a script, following what was expected of me, but now, I don't know." Lucas nodded. He understood. It wasn't just her. It was something many people went through, especially when they realized that the path they were on wasn't the one they truly wanted. "I get that," he said softly. "Sometimes, you need to stop and ask yourself if you're doing what you really want, or if you're just following the plan everyone else made for you." Emma's gaze softened, and she smiled faintly. "You're wise," she said, her voice warm. "I've spent so many years trying to live up to everyone's expectations. My family, my business partners, they all have their own vision of who I should be. But what about me? What do I want?" Lucas could see the struggle in her eyes. He could tell that Emma had spent so long trying to meet other people's needs and desires that she had forgotten about her own. "Maybe that's the hardest part," Lucas said, leaning forward slightly. "Finding out who you really are, when you've spent so much time being who everyone else wants you to be." Emma looked at him with a new understanding, as if something inside her had shifted. "I never thought I'd meet someone who could make me feel like I wasn't alone in all of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas felt a strange warmth in his chest at her words. It wasn't like he had done anything special. He had just been there, helping when she needed it. But somehow, that simple act had created a bond between them, something that went deeper than either of them had expected. "You're not alone," Lucas said, his voice steady. "We all feel like we're carrying the weight of the world sometimes. But we don't have to do it alone." Emma smiled, this time with more confidence, her eyes sparkling with a hint of hope. "Thank you, Lucas," she said, her voice sincere. "For everything. For saving me, for being here when I needed someone. I don't think I would have made it through this storm without you." Lucas felt a lump in his throat at her words, but he forced it down. "You would have made it," he said, giving her a reassuring smile. "You're stronger than you think." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, the kind of moment where words weren't necessary because the connection between them spoke louder than anything either of them could say. Outside, the storm had passed, and the night was calm. The cabin felt like a little world of its own, sheltered from the chaos outside. As Emma and Lucas sat there, the fire crackling softly in the background, they both realized that something had changed between them. It wasn't just the storm that had brought them together. It was something deeper, something that neither of them could explain, but both of them felt. And in that moment, as they sat in the warmth of the fire, they both knew that their lives would never be the same again. The night had fallen completely now, and the storm outside had transformed into a quiet, eerie calm. The snow lay undisturbed across the mountainside, the world outside the cabin silent except for the occasional snap of the fire. Lucas sat across from Emma, watching her closely. The way she had opened up to him earlier, sharing her uncertainty about her future, had made him feel like he was seeing her in a new light. She wasn't just the wealthy, untouchable heiress anymore, she was someone who was just as lost and searching for something real as he was. Emma shifted in her seat, glancing at the door as if contemplating something. Her expression was thoughtful, as if the weight of everything she had just said was sinking in. She turned back to Lucas, meeting his gaze. "You know," she started, her voice softer now, almost reflective, "I never realized how much I had been running away from my life, even before today. I think, deep down, I knew that what I was doing wasn't really living. But I didn't know where to go, or how to stop. And then, here I am, stranded in a snowstorm, and I feel different." Lucas nodded slowly. He understood that feeling all too well. He had spent most of his life on the road, never settling in one place, always looking for something, but never knowing exactly what that was. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "you have to get lost before you can find your way." Emma looked at him with a small, almost wistful smile. "You make it sound so simple," she said, her tone playful, but with a hint of sincerity beneath it. "But I don't know if it's that easy for me." Lucas smiled, feeling the warmth between them growing. "It's not easy for anyone. But maybe finding your way isn't about having all the answers right away. Maybe it's about taking one step at a time." Emma considered his words, and for a moment, the silence between them felt comfortable. It wasn't awkward or forced, just two people in a quiet space, sharing a moment of understanding. Emma stood up slowly, stretching a little as she walked to the window. She peered outside, her reflection faint against the darkened glass. "I've spent so much of my life doing what I'm supposed to do," she said, her voice soft. "I've never had the chance to really just be. I don't know who I am outside of all the expectations." Lucas got up and walked over to stand next to her, his eyes following hers as she looked out at the night. "You'll figure it out," he said gently, his voice reassuring. "But it's okay to take your time. You don't have to have it all figured out now." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face, and for a moment, they just stood there, connected by something unspoken. There was a quiet intimacy in the air, something neither of them had expected, but both of them were starting to feel. "Maybe you're right," Emma said after a beat, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Maybe I've been too focused on the wrong things. On what I should be doing, who I should be." She looked at him again, her gaze lingering. "I'm not sure what happens next, but I feel like I'm finally starting to see things clearly." Lucas smiled, his heart light. "That's a good start," he said. Emma returned his smile, the weight on her shoulders lifting just a little. "Thank you, Lucas," she said, her voice warm with gratitude. "For everything. For helping me when I needed it. I don't think I would have made it through this without you." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat at her words, but he swallowed it down. "You don't have to thank me," he said with a shake of his head. "I'm just glad I was here to help. You're strong, Emma. You're stronger than you think." Emma looked at him, her eyes softening. "Maybe I'll believe that soon," she said quietly. They stood there for a moment longer, the warmth of the fire crackling in the background, the tension between them easing with every passing second. Emma turned back to the window, her hand resting lightly on the glass as she looked out at the snow. "It's funny," she said after a pause, "how sometimes you have to lose everything to find something better. I never thought a snowstorm could bring me clarity." Lucas chuckled softly, his eyes never leaving her. "Life has a funny way of working like that," he said. Emma turned to him again, her smile genuine. "Yeah, it does," she agreed. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace settling in her heart. Maybe the storm had brought them together for a reason, maybe it had forced her to face what she had been avoiding all these years. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was okay with that. She was ready to take the next step, whatever it may be. The fire in the cabin crackled softly, its warm glow casting a gentle light over the two of them. Lucas and Emma sat across from each other, the distance between them now feeling less like an expanse and more like a shared space of understanding. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the world beyond the cabin was blanketed in quiet stillness. The storm had passed, but in its wake, something had shifted within both of them. They had both been through their own battles, Lucas, wandering aimlessly through life, and Emma, lost in a world of expectations and wealth. And now, here they were, two people who had found an unexpected connection in the midst of chaos. Emma shifted in her seat, looking over at Lucas, her eyes thoughtful. She hadn't realized how much she needed to just talk, to be heard, and here, in this remote cabin with a man who seemed to understand her without judgment, she was beginning to feel like maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the weight she had been carrying. "Do you ever feel like you're just pretending?" she asked softly, her voice tentative. Lucas looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "Pretending," he repeated, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Pretending to be okay, pretending like everything makes sense," she explained, her eyes downcast. "For so long, I've just gone along with what people expected of me. I never stopped to question it. I thought if I played the part well enough, I'd figure it all out." Lucas leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "I think we all do that," he said gently. "I've been pretending for years. Pretending I knew where I was going, pretending that being on the road, being alone, was enough. But deep down, I knew it wasn't." Emma looked up at him, her eyes locking with his. "So, what do you do when you realize that everything you've been doing doesn't feel right?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You stop pretending," Lucas said simply. "You take a step back, and you let yourself feel what you've been avoiding." Emma nodded slowly, as if the weight of his words was sinking in. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the need to hide behind the walls she had built. "I don't know if I'm ready to stop pretending," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas reached over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it all at once," he said kindly. "Take it one step at a time. Just let yourself breathe." Emma smiled faintly, a small but genuine smile. She felt lighter somehow, as if something inside her had shifted. Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was the conversation, or maybe it was just the fact that for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't think I've ever really thanked you properly for saving me. For being here." Lucas smiled back at her, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I just did what anyone would do. But if it helps, I'm glad I was here." There was a pause, a moment of stillness between them, and for a brief second, Emma thought she could hear the thrum of her own heart, a steady rhythm that wasn't filled with doubt or fear, but with something softer, something closer to hope. "I don't know what's going to happen next," Emma said after a while, her voice steady but thoughtful. "But I do know that I'm not ready to go back to the way things were. To the way I was." Lucas nodded. "And you don't have to," he said simply. "You can choose your own path. You don't have to follow anyone else's. It's your life." Emma met his gaze, the weight in her chest easing just a little more. "Maybe that's what I've been running from all along," she said. "The idea that I could choose. That I could decide who I want to be, instead of letting everyone else decide for me." Lucas smiled, the warmth in his eyes growing. "Exactly," he said. "And you don't have to do it alone, either." Emma's smile widened, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. She was starting to believe him. She was starting to believe that, maybe, she didn't have to carry the weight of her family's expectations anymore. She didn't have to pretend to be the person everyone thought she should be. She could be someone new, someone real. The fire crackled, the cabin warm and safe around them. For the first time in ages, Emma felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not in the world she had left behind, not in the life she had been born into, but in this moment, with Lucas. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. She didn't know where her path would take her, but she knew one thing for certain, she wasn't going to walk it alone. The next few days passed in a quiet haze. The storm had completely passed, and the world outside the cabin was now covered in a pristine layer of snow, the air crisp and clear. Lucas and Emma had spent the last few days talking, getting to know each other in a way neither of them had expected. It was strange how quickly things had changed, how quickly Emma had gone from the guarded, sheltered heiress to someone who was finally starting to confront the truths of her life. And Lucas, the lone backpacker who had been running from his own problems, was beginning to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The morning of the fourth day, Lucas woke up early, as was his habit. He stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape, the sun casting a soft glow over the mountains. It was peaceful, still, and for a moment, he let himself just breathe, taking in the calm of the world around him. It had been a while since he'd felt at peace. The weight of everything, the uncertainty, the constant movement, had always been there, but now, standing there, watching the world come alive with the early light, he felt something had shifted inside him. He wasn't running anymore. Not from his past, not from his future. And he had Emma to thank for that. As he turned away from the window, he saw her standing in the doorway, her hair still messy from sleep, but her eyes clearer than he had seen them in a long time. She smiled at him, a real smile, not the forced kind she used to wear when she felt like she had to. It was a smile that said she was finally starting to embrace the person she could be. "Morning," she said softly, her voice still a little rough from sleep. Lucas smiled back, his heart light. "Morning," he replied, stepping aside so she could join him by the window. She moved over to him, standing side by side, looking out at the world together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something comforting about the silence, a peace that they had both needed. "I've been thinking," Emma said after a while, breaking the silence. "About what you said. About choosing my own path." Lucas turned to look at her, a curious look on his face. "Yeah?" "Yeah," she said, nodding. "It's not going to be easy. I've spent so many years trying to meet everyone else's expectations, but now I'm starting to see that it's not enough. I want to do something for myself. Something that feels real." Lucas's heart warmed at her words. He had always known that Emma had potential, but seeing her come to terms with her own desires, her own dreams, made him proud of her in a way he hadn't expected. "You'll get there," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "It's not going to be easy, but you're stronger than you think. And you don't have to do it alone." Emma looked at him, her eyes softening with gratitude. "I've been thinking about that too," she said. "About how I don't have to carry everything by myself. And how maybe I can trust other people, let them in, instead of pushing them away." Lucas nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's okay to trust people. You don't have to do everything alone." They stood there for a moment, the snow falling gently outside, their quiet conversation filling the space between them with a sense of connection neither of them had expected. For the first time, Emma didn't feel the weight of her family's legacy on her shoulders. She didn't feel like she had to live up to the perfect image that had been crafted for her. She felt like she was finally able to breathe. "I think I'm ready," she said quietly. "Ready to start something new. To stop pretending, to stop running, and to start living for me." Lucas's smile widened. "That's all anyone can do," he said. "Start living for yourself." As the days continued to pass, Emma began to make small changes in her life, one step at a time. She started to reach out to people she had once distanced herself from, reconnecting with old friends, talking to her family about her decisions, and slowly, she began to step out from the shadow of the life she had been born into. Lucas, too, had begun to feel a sense of purpose he had longed for. He wasn't just drifting anymore, he was building something. And though he didn't know exactly where it would take him, he knew that the journey had begun. One evening, as the sun began to set and the cabin filled with the soft glow of twilight, Lucas and Emma sat together on the porch, their feet dangling over the edge. The air was cool and the quiet of the mountains surrounded them, but for once, it felt like everything was in its right place. "I don't know where this road will take me," Emma said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But I know I'm not afraid of it anymore." Lucas looked at her, his heart full. "Then that's all that matters." For the first time in a long while, Emma felt free, ready to step into the future with her own path, no longer defined by the life that others had chosen for her. And for Lucas, the road ahead no longer felt like an escape, it felt like home. The days that followed were a mix of quiet moments and small victories. Emma continued to take steps toward her own life, the one she was finally choosing for herself. The phone calls to her family, the meetings with her business partners, each one was a step closer to the person she wanted to become. And with each day that passed, she felt a little lighter, a little more at peace with her decision to step away from the expectations that had once defined her. Lucas, too, was changing. The more time he spent with Emma, the more he realized how much he had been holding himself back. He had always been the lone traveler, the one who preferred to keep moving, never staying in one place for too long. But something about Emma's openness, her willingness to embrace her own path, made him start to think differently about his own journey. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, Lucas and Emma sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the world around them. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of evening that made everything feel calm and peaceful. For the first time in a long time, neither of them felt the need to rush anywhere, to do anything. They were simply there, together, sharing the quiet. "I've been thinking," Emma said, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. Lucas turned to her, waiting for her to continue. "About what's next," she added, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "About how I want to live the rest of my life. I don't want to just exist, you know? I want to make a difference. I want to do something that matters." Lucas nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He could see the determination in her eyes, the same determination he had seen in himself when he decided to stop running. "I think you already are making a difference," he said softly. "By choosing yourself, by choosing to live for you, you're already changing everything." Emma looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Maybe," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "But I want to do more. I want to use what I have to help others, to make an impact." Lucas could feel the weight of her words, and for the first time, he felt a sense of pride for her, as if she were finally stepping into her own power. "You will," he said, his voice full of certainty. "I believe in you." Emma smiled at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Lucas," she said softly. "For everything. For being here when I needed someone, for helping me find my way. I don't think I could have done this without you." Lucas's heart warmed at her words, and he felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't used to being thanked, but somehow, this time, it felt different. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice hoarse. "You've always had it in you. I just helped you see it." Emma looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Maybe you're right," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe I just needed someone to show me that I could do it on my own." They sat in silence for a while longer, the quiet stretching between them, comfortable and easy. It was strange, this bond they had formed in such a short time, but it was undeniable. Emma was starting to see herself in a new light, and Lucas was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to keep running from his past anymore. He could stop pretending too. "You know," Emma said after a while, her voice breaking the silence again, "I've been thinking about what you said. About taking things one step at a time. I think I've been trying to do too much at once, trying to solve everything all at once. But maybe, just maybe, I need to let things unfold naturally." Lucas turned to look at her, a soft smile crossing his face. "That's the way it works," he said gently. "You can't rush the process. Sometimes, the best things happen when you stop trying so hard and just let life happen." Emma nodded, taking in his words. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was okay with that. She didn't have to have everything figured out. She didn't have to be the perfect daughter, the perfect businesswoman. She could be herself, and that was enough. The night settled in around them, the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky above. Lucas and Emma sat together in the quiet, no longer two strangers brought together by a storm, but two people who had found something real in each other. And for the first time in a long while, both of them felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. As the days passed, the world outside the cabin slowly returned to normal. The snow began to melt, revealing the green of the forest beneath it, and the weather grew warmer, the chill of winter gradually fading. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. Emma was different now, and so was Lucas. Both of them had come to terms with parts of their lives they had been running from, and they had found something in each other that neither had expected: peace. One morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, casting a soft golden light across the cabin, Emma woke up with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. She stood by the window, looking out at the world she had once felt so disconnected from, but now, it felt different. She was no longer looking at it as an outsider, but as someone who was finally part of it, someone who was ready to live her own life, on her own terms. She wasn't going to be the woman everyone else expected her to be. She was going to be herself, and that was enough. Lucas, who had quietly watched Emma's transformation, felt something stirring in his own heart. He had spent so many years running, thinking that being alone was the only way to be free. But now, with Emma standing beside him, he realized that maybe freedom wasn't about running at all. Maybe it was about being able to stand still, to face the future with someone else by your side. He hadn't expected to find someone who could make him feel this way, but here she was, changing everything. As they sat down to breakfast that morning, Emma turned to Lucas with a soft smile. "You know," she said, her voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do next. And I think I'm ready to take the next step." Lucas looked at her, his heart racing slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. Emma took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I'm ready to go back to my life. But this time, I'm going back for me, not for anyone else. I'm going to take control of my future, make decisions that are mine to make." Lucas felt a sense of pride swell in his chest as he listened to her. He knew this wasn't going to be easy for her. There would be people in her life who would try to pull her back, who would want her to follow the same old path. But Emma was stronger now, more determined than he had ever seen her. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "I know you'll do great things." Emma smiled at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you, Lucas. I don't think I could have gotten here without you. You helped me see that I don't have to live for anyone else's expectations." They sat there in the peaceful quiet of the cabin, both of them knowing that the journey ahead would be different, but that they were both ready for it. "What about you?" Emma asked after a moment, her voice gentle. "What's next for you?" Lucas thought about her question for a moment, his eyes drifting toward the window where the world outside was waking up. He had always been a wanderer, never staying in one place for too long. But now, he realized that maybe it was time to stop running, to stop looking for something that he didn't need to find. "I'm not sure yet," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But I think I'm ready to find my place. Maybe it's time I stop wandering, stop running away from things. Maybe it's time to build something." Emma looked at him, her eyes full of understanding. "Whatever it is, I know you'll figure it out," she said. "You're not alone anymore." Lucas smiled, his heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. They had both found something in each other, something that neither had been looking for, but both needed. As they finished their breakfast, the sound of the birds outside filled the air, and the warmth of the cabin felt like a promise of new beginnings. The world was waiting for them, and for the first time, they felt ready to face it. They didn't know exactly where their paths would lead, but they knew they wouldn't be walking them alone. And that, in itself, was enough. As they left the cabin, standing side by side, the mountain in front of them seemed less like an obstacle and more like an opportunity. An opportunity to start over, to choose their own paths, and to face the future with hope in their hearts. For the first time in a long while, Emma and Lucas both felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be.